Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 133 of Humanity Rising. Humanity Rising is an initiative of Ubiquity University and over 350 partnering organizations from all over the world that arose in the midst of the pandemic we're all still undergoing as an opportunity on a daily basis for people worldwide to come together and share their experiences, promote various solutions, take counsel with one another and how we can improve our strategic effectiveness so that we can ensure that the world beyond the pandemic is more conducive to the kind of prosperity and health and resilience and sustainability we all know is not only possible, but is essential if we're going to preserve a human life on Earth. One of the advantages of doing this on a daily basis, as we've noted, is that as world events unfold, Humanity Rising is here. And we are here for the US election, which we've been covering all week. And now, as we were commenting on with some great humor in the green room before we started, Tuesday has now become Friday. And we're now in live history, everyone. And it could be that during this program, one of the major networks will call the election for one of the candidates, something we expected on Tuesday, but it might happen on Friday, may not. But we're watching history unfold in real time, and we're part of it. We're in one of those precious, extraordinarily nuanced moments in all of our lives and in the history of the world, where every choice counts and every vote needs to be made and every vote needs to be counted. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I'd like to now turn it over to my good friend and co-moderator, Sabina von Gafka, who will commence our program. Sabina.
Once again, thank you, Jim, and a warm welcome to all of our viewers and all of our streaming partners and everyone who is joining in this conversation. And just as Jim said, here we are with Humanity Rising, our own sort of network of networks of change makers, watching the world unfold. And in parallel, we're having discussions that can really catalyze this movement and moment to change. And I thought I would give a quick summary of the week because it's really been such a beautiful example of what a platform like Humanity Rising that can facilitate conversations and bring on people who really have both the knowledge, the wisdom, the insights, the multi-perspectives that we really need to have dialogue and to spark and ignite change, and also to navigate humanity forward, because that is what we need, real leadership and also insights and education. So the week kicked off on Monday, and we had our own amazing Shelly Alcorn, who you all know, but COO of Ubiquity University, who started on Monday, and each day of this week has given us such insightful and knowledgeable and also multi-perspective observations of both politics and culture of America, but of course also giving us updates on what is taking place as the election in the United States unfolds still. And on Tuesday, we had an amazing session on the consequences of presidential election. And we were guested by Charles Eisenstein, an American public intellectual who's written numerous books on ecology and social affairs, and also the purely wisdom-filled and insightful Vandana Shiva from India, who is truly one of the great intellectuals and also political activists, who has written extensively on globalization and democracy and the environment, and also about human rights. And they really conveyed a mandala of wisdom, but not only wisdom, but also suggestions on inspired actions and narratives that we need in this time, in this transition from an era of change that we so many times have mentioned to a change of eras, where we're now really forced to rethink of our identity, of what it means to be human, and what it means to step up into the new world that we are creating amidst this turbulence and era of uncertainty. And we also talked a lot about looking at the definition of democracy. How should democracy manifest itself going forward, and what kind of future economics do we need to put in place to really propel the world in the right direction? And on Wednesday, we had Joe Jarofsky, author of the famous book Synchronicity and co-founder of U Processes, and the immensely insightful Rianne Eisler, who has been part of our conversations a couple of times, and she's a social systems scientist, an attorney, an author, not least of The Chalice and the Blade. And both Charles and Rianne really contributed with deep and profound insights and aspects that was elaborating about our current system of the domination model with its patriarchal matrix that is so transparently obvious looking at the US election, and also talking about emphasizing the need to understand the gestalt of civilization that we have now in order to really understand and of course facilitate us to go from the domination model to the partnership model, which Rianne has spoken so intensely and insightfully for many years. And it really does seem that this is the moment where the partnership model has a place in the new world, and for us to really understand this. And the beautiful outcome, which I really want to emphasize, of that session was that in the end, both Rianne and Charles realized that they're both different projects, U Processes and Rianne's partnership model, that there was so much synergy. So now they are elaborating around a partnership. And that is truly the essence of Humanity Rising, being that facilitator, that platform where you who actively contribute also can find synergies that can then be a catalyst for change. And yesterday, we turned to the insights and knowledge of Jack Policar and Max Perry, two millennials who have been working on voter registrations and get out the vote, and who, you know, have grown up or have come to grow up in this era of both technology, digitalization, Trump and all of that, and gave their perspective out of a millennial point of view. What does this imply, and how do they see the changes that are necessary, and also the way the world is looking? And they were accompanied by Carolyn Baker, who is the author of The Coming Chaos and Love in the Age of Ecological Collapse, and other books on politics and culture in climate change. And this was also a truly vital and vibrant conversation with many insights, and above all, raising the notion of that we truly are in a crisis of trust. And trust is such a fundamental component for us to just, in order for us to even navigate towards a common goal, and to navigate back to ourselves, really have that inner alignment to be able to address the outer experience, really demands trust, not only trust in our environment, but actually trust in ourselves and our own values and our own ethics and our own choices and so forth. And also looked at the behavioral change that is needed, and the current normalization of domination behavior that is so apparent once again in the US election. And today we're going to have some final words and thoughts from yet another insightful individual, Otto Scharmer, who is professor at MIT, also author of Presence and Theory U, and co-founder of the U Process. And Otto will, I presume, be using the U Process and presencing methodologies to provide a context for understanding fear, hate, and exclusion, in contrast to what we really need: curiosity, compassion, empathy, courage, and so forth. And of course, we'll get a daily update from the one and only Shelly Alcorn. But before we start the conversation, let us once again align ourselves and really feel the presence of our energy and our hearts in a 1 minute heart coherent to just come here and now. So with exhales and inhales. Thank you for taking part in that 1 minute heart coherence. And I could really, really feel the energy today. And I just want to express such gratitude that you all turn up each and every day, because just this 1 minute is really a step forward for humanity rising in so many ways. And with that, I hand over the word to Jim.
Thank you, Sabina. Always a pleasure. As we commence our program today, I want to just say as a framing statement, just at one level, how proud I am as a 10th generation American. My people first came to the shores of North America, fleeing the persecution of Louis XIV. They were Huguenots fleeing France. And in 1686, they landed in North Carolina, almost 100 years before the Revolutionary War. And so my clan has been part of American history since before the beginning. And over the last several months, as we've borne witness to what's been transpiring in an overt attempt by the President of the United States to subvert the election, I think all of us were extremely concerned about the integrity of the voting process itself. But I think the events over the last several days have shown that the basic integrity of American democracy has withstood the subversion. Took a lot of hits. Post office was slowed down, social media was manipulated. There's a lot of things that happened. There was bullying on the streets. But on Tuesday, a record number of US citizens cast their ballots, and it appears, as we gather together today on Friday, that they're all being counted in a judicious, fair-minded way. And it looks like we're going to be hearing soon that the days of President Trump are over. And I think that the real question that will then ensue is how will Trump, the Republican Party, his followers respond to democracy itself. But I think we're seeing what the oldest continuous democracy in the history of the world is capable of doing under duress. And now we are entering uncharted territory, because I think it's probably a good conclusion that this is not over, even after all the votes have been counted and a winner declared. That's the uncharted part of the democratic journey of the United States. And we'll be following this, obviously, for as long as it takes. But it's very exciting to be here on Friday, knowing that history is live and unfolding right before our eyes. And we're all participating in it, both in terms of the light and the dark dimensions. So we're going to start, as we've been doing since Monday, with Shelly Alcorn. And so Shelly, I want to turn it over to you. And there may be some breaking news even during the course of this program, which we'll bring to you if it's of sufficient worthiness. But Shelly, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to see you again on this Friday. Today has been a long week as we have fallen into this space in America, the United States. Yes, there are indications that the election will be called today, that Joe Biden will be considered president-elect. The clearest sign we have of that is the Secret Service is ramping up their presence outside Biden's home, and the airspace over Biden's home has been restricted to national defense airspace. So the Secret Service is making moves, which gives us an idea that they believe that a call is imminent or close within the next 24 hours. As Jim said, we will be sure to bring that to you. When we started a few weeks ago, as I was talking, when we started Monday, I am still encouraging everyone to remember that we are in a marathon. Today is not the end of this process. We may be very happy that the Electoral College vote that is assigned to Vice President Biden will carry forward on December 14th in the Electoral College. But a few things have happened over the last 24 hours that I was more optimistic yesterday than I am today. And that is the nature of unfolding events. So let's talk a little bit about what's happened over the last sort of 24 hours, 48 hours, that I want to caution everybody about. Because I want to make sure that we do celebrate and that we're light and that we feel good and that the process is working. However, we need to maintain our centering in the knowledge that things may start going sideways very quickly, so that we are mentally and emotionally and spiritually prepared to handle what the news may be throwing at us over the next 72 hours. I'm going back to our framing that we used beginning at the beginning of the week, where we talked about delegitimizing the vote. And I don't think that we can overstate the impact of Donald Trump and the address he gave last night from the People's House behind that lectern, where he denigrated our democracy through baseless accusations of fraud and tampering and other things, doing what the United States denounces other countries' leaders for doing. And he did it inside of the People's House. What I want people to recognize is, even though the White House yesterday was floating these ideas, like former chief of staff was floating the idea that Donald Trump will begin to prepare for a run in 2024, the president made it clear last night that he is not backing down. And psychologically, he cannot. He has put himself into a position where he is going to pursue and use every mechanism available at his behest to try and invalidate the election, particularly in the battleground states. So I want people to take that in, that he crossed the Rubicon. He cannot go back on what he said last night, and certainly not in the venue in which he said it. And that is a serious, serious issue. Yesterday, Trump Jr., his son, said that we need to advance a total war to win. Steve Bannon, former White House advisor to President Trump and campaign advisor, was banned from Twitter and YouTube for a clip where he suggested that Dr. Fauci and Christopher Wray of the FBI should be beheaded. Mitch McConnell, after the speech last night from the White House, he's obviously leader in the Senate. He had used mealy-mouthed language the day before about, oh, well, sure, we'll count all the legal votes. Last night, he declined to comment on what Trump said. Lindsey Graham backed up the president, another vocal Republican senator, veteran senator. And Lindsey Graham donated $500,000 to Trump's legal fund. Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, said the Republican Party will not back down, that they believe that this election is being stolen. Facebook banned a Stop the Steal group. That's the hashtag that they're trying to trend on Twitter, Stop the Steal. That is what most of the Trump protesters are saying outside of the election board's offices where the ballots are being counted. It grew to 365,000 people in one day. Facebook did take that down. And a few Republican voices, such as Mitt Romney, came out and said what the president said was not okay. Republican senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, said these claims are baseless, that Pennsylvania elections are being conducted appropriately. So let's take that in for just a moment. Yes, we may get the count today. Yes, we hope it's what we want. We hope the Secret Service is doing the right thing in doing what they're doing. I think we need to take into account that the ground is being laid for continued legal challenges until December 14th, the Electoral College vote. We now have media, right-wing media figures getting into things. We had Alex Jones, who is a conspiracy theorist and is followed by many, many Republicans, showing up at one of these Stop the Steal protests. We had Mark Levin, first time I've heard the call to send a separate slate of electors to the Electoral College. That these states with Republican legislators, Republican legislatures should send a competing slate of votes to the Electoral College. So that is starting to bubble up. And there is increasing chatter on the right-wing blogosphere, the right-wing chatosphere, increasingly violent. If Biden wins, we're going to have to take steps because it's an illegitimate win. And we need to protect the country. So that's where we stand. That's where we stand today. On Wednesday, we did learn that Bill Barr in the Department of Justice sent a memo to federal prosecutors in the United States saying that they reserve the right to send in armed federal agents into closed polling places or places where ballots are being counted in order to investigate fraud. So the longer this goes on, the more likely it is we may see the Department of Justice beginning to interfere in Pennsylvania, Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. So the Department of Justice is not allowed to send armed personnel into elections while elections are going on. They're arguing that the election is over, so now they can go in with armed officers to do that. what we need to think of now is how big is the electoral college split going to be in terms of how many states will Joe Biden and Donald Trump eventually be declared the winners of in the counts. Georgia's already talking about a recount. Wisconsin's talking about a recount. So we're going to see more recount efforts, I think, over the next few days if Joe Biden is declared the president-elect. And the margin between the 270 and higher is very, very important for one reason. Let's go back to the Electoral College like we did on Monday, and let's have a quick refresher here. Let's just say that we get 270 or 275, and Trump gets very, very close to that amount of number. In 2016, we had 10 faithless electors. There have been about 150 instances of this throughout American history where an elector was sent and told by the state to vote one way and they voted another way. That's what's known as a faithless elector. We had 10 of those in 2016. 7 votes actually stood, are actually counted as valid. 3 were thrown out. Trump lost 2 of the Electoral College votes in 2016 that he had technically won, and Clinton lost 5 that she had technically won. That was not enough to change the results of the Electoral College vote because the spread between Trump and Clinton was big enough so those faithless electors did not have an opportunity to sway the election. If we're coming down to 270, 268, if we're coming down to something very, very close, the nightmare scenario is that we only need 1 faithless elector, depending on how these states are called, Nevada, the whole 9 yards. We would only need 1 faithless elector to create a tie in the Electoral College, at which point it goes to the House of Representatives to solve. And we talked about that earlier, that the House of Representatives would have 1 vote per delegation to vote on the president. Now, the Supreme Court last summer, I want to remind everybody, upheld the rights of 20 states to demand that their electors vote the way they are told to vote by the state that sends them. There are 14 states that demand it. There's an additional sort of wiggle room in 20 others, but SCOTUS upheld that right. And electors can be sanctioned if they do change their vote. However, it's only a small fine. And with a lot of money floating around in politics and a lot of promises to pay that fine or pay those fines, we may have some faithless electors who do attempt to sway the final count. So have faith, keep heart full. We are going to attempt to move through this process and do this correctly. Language matters. We've talked about Timothy Snyder. Language matters. Fox News has ordered all of its on-air talent not to use the term president-elect when referring to Biden until all legal challenges are done. And that matters for those Republicans and Trump supporters. Remember, it's not Republicans, it's Trump supporters. The Trump supporters who watch Fox News will probably not be referring to Vice President Biden as president-elect. And that is very, very important that we use the term president-elect. Some final words from Timothy Snyder, I think I will save until the end. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to go from here. I can't keep coming on every day. I wish I could, but I may start blogging on Ubiverse if some of you would find that helpful to continue to share perspectives over the next 6 weeks as these events continue to unfold. So please, let's be joyful and excited and get that energy up to celebrate President-elect Biden to move that positive energy forward into the US, into the world, that we have crossed this. Let's remember that we are still in the middle of a soft coup, and that anything can happen over the next 6 weeks. And I am not going to relax until December 14th and the Electoral College vote. So anyway, so yay! It's a glass half full, glass half empty sort of moment, but let's go with that. And I appreciate all of you for being here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelly. It's very sobering. Thank you. Thank you. It's time for ruthless realism. And that's what I've so appreciated about your comments each day. And it's certainly true, everyone, that we've come so far, so good, but we have a long way to go. And we're dealing with people in the White House and in the Trump network and coalition that are determined to figure out a way, using all the instrumentality inherent in being president of the United States and in control of the executive bureaucracy, to effectuate essentially a coup d'etat. So let us be vigilant, and let us be mindful, and let us communicate with each other as often as we can. And every day we'll be bringing you updates as we can, and history unfolds. It's my real pleasure now to introduce someone that we brought in intentionally to be the final speaker. I don't know of anybody I can think of amongst all the people I know who's more wise to the ways of the world and more expansive in the container with which he holds the world. And I think that's the mark of real wisdom, to see the parts from a larger whole. And so, Otto, we want to welcome you. I've put his recent article on, post-truth, post-democracy, post-humanity, how we move beyond Trumpism to a transformational world in the chat. I think it's a central reading for everybody. So please download it. And Otto, I now just turn the program over to you for your thoughts on any aspect that we've covered, and then, talk about what you would like to talk about, and then we'll meet up on the other side with comments and questions from the audience. Thank you so much and welcome.
All right, thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for including me in this incredible lineup and conversation that you have been having throughout the week. Throughout this longest Tuesday we ever participated in, which looks like will come to a conclusion today to some degree. And as we speak, we have Biden leading in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, and in Nevada, according to the New York Times. And so that means it's not going to be a 270 situation. It will be significantly different, but the margin in some of these states, of course, are small. So all the legal battles, of course, as Shelly shared with us, are going to continue. But here's what gives me like a ray of hope. I think what Trump did last night was to be expected, right? So that no one expected anything else. But what gave me hope is how people responded to that, which is that what he pronounces is now gradually becoming less and less relevant for where the country is going. So the show goes on. It just becomes less and less relevant, kind of where the country is moving. And in reality, I think he's already launching his 2024 campaign. I think this is not really to turn the to turn around the results that will emerge over the next few days. It is more staging kind of the next stage of the battle. And of course, that's where everything he's doing now is the foundation for that. So that's why we do need to pay attention to that, but we also need to put our attention on the space of possibility that opens up right now as we speak. And so I want to kick it off just with a few observations, 4 or 5, on the longest Tuesday we ever participated in, and then move into the conversation, Jim, as we said before. So the first observation really is connecting, to some degree, Jim, on your opening remarks, which is the most important observation for me is, and the most important outcome of this week and this long Tuesday is what did not happen. The sky has not been falling. The 50,000 people, the army of 50,000 people that Trump was calling for did not show up. Violence did not ensue. And the violent confrontations and the sinking of the country into a new era of civil war did not happen. All the baseless claims against all the weapons of not only delegitimizing, but also of voter suppression that have been thrown against this process were not enough to break the institution of democracy. So I think what we have been seeing over the past 3 days is a microcosm of the last 4 years. And that is that our core institutions of democracy are bending, but not breaking, and will eventually bounce back and bounce forward. And that's, it looks like, is going to begin to happen today, and it will be a long journey and a long struggle. So that's my first observation, right? The most important outcome of this week is what did not happen. The sky has not been falling. Number 2, the country still divided. Trump in 2020, 5 million more votes than in 2016. Now, 2016, he was the disruptor, right? He disrupted the status quo. And so that's to a very high degree kind of understandable. But if we take into account everything that has happened since, and then realize that the number of people who voted for him increased by 5 million instead of decreasing, that gives us, so that in the sense of deep division that we experience around race, and that are manifesting in the election result around race, around gender, around generation, around urban versus rural, and around identity. Give us something to meditate on. More white people voted for Trump than voted for Biden. Now, all these numbers are not yet confirmed, but that's what it looks like. And what that means is, with Trump gone, the real problem, the real work is just beginning now, which is the transformation of Trumpism, the transformation of the structure that has been creating that phenomenon. So what then explains this puzzle, right? After the 4 years we just went through, 5 million more people vote for Trump. So what explains that? And I think just to begin an understanding there, the first level is to just acknowledge the profound level of exclusion of economic opportunity that we are realizing in our country, the profound level of excluding people from participating in democratic opportunity, right? The opportunity to participate in the democratic process, be part of the conversation, and the profound exclusion we realize in terms of educational opportunity. Because in reality, our educational system is replicating and cementing the class society and not breaking it. So that's the third observation, right? The deeper structures, enabling structures of Trumpism. Number 4, what's the gift? The gift of Trumpism and the gift of this election. So I would say the gift of Trumpism is very similar to the gift of COVID, which is making us aware of what we kind of knew already before, but now it's right in our face. Some of the deeper structural issues and trauma that we need to address, we need to heal. So the gift of Trump is to make us aware of this deeper structure of Trumpism that I'm going to explore a little more. And the gift of this week's election of this long Tuesday is that in order to address the real issue that we face, transforming the structure of Trumpism, in order to address that, we for sure know where the solution, right? The big challenges that we face now around climate change, climate justice, biodiversity, where is the solution definitely not coming from? And that's from above. It's not going to come from a Biden-McConnell situation in Washington. So the solution for the profound and pressing challenges that we face is not descending onto us from above. It's not going to happen. And even though we thought in 2008 it would happen that way, we learned that's actually not true. So now in 2020, we have less illusions around that. And we know that if we want to change any of these things, we need to activate our own agency, individually and also collectively. And that's the real work that's ahead. So, and that brings me to the fifth point. And I want to show a few pictures or images around that. And then we can move into the conversation. So the fifth point is really, okay, so what then is kind of a deeper view of this kind of enabling structure, and what does it mean? What really is kind of the deeper transformation of the current moment? And so I want to use this image to just remind us of what has been said many times, and I'm sure you have been exploring throughout the week. Living in a moment of disruption, right? Which really means that the current moment, right, the moment we live in right now, is going to be different from how we are going to live and work together in the future. And so we all know we live in a historical moment in 2020, and really in this decade that we are moving into, where one civilization is dying one way of organizing society, one way of organizing how we live and work together is dying. And another one is wanting to be born. But we haven't quite exactly figured out, right, what that new way of living and working together looks like. And the thing that we have figured out maybe the least is how to move from here to there. And that's what I'm going to talk about just a little bit. And what I believe, and I think what has been probably going as a red thread throughout, or golden thread kind of throughout your week's conversations, is that it takes a journey. It takes like an outer journey, but also an inner journey. And so I have been investigating that journey through the lens of awareness-based systems change. And I want to, systems change, or the systems lens basically starts with differentiating between symptoms at the top, right? Like the ones that I just mentioned regarding to the election. And then the deeper structural enabling conditions, right, below the waterline. So that's really, what we want to explore a little more. And I want to, and these three words, structures, thought, and source. Instead of source, we could have also said awareness or consciousness. So those three dimensions or words basically capture the evolution of systems thinking over the past half century, right? From structures to the underlying paradigms of thought to really the deeper structures of consciousness. So let me summarize this approach with 4 lines. You cannot understand a system unless you change it. Famously, Kurt Lewin, the founder of action research, who came here from Germany, actually, after Hitler took power in 1933. You cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness, right? So, which basically means, yes, you need to include all 4 of these levels today, right? It's not good enough to just react against the symptoms. We need to understand and address kind of these deeper structural and root issues. So, which leads to number 3, how, right? How do you do that? How do you transform consciousness on the level of the collective? You cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. And 4, you cannot transform a system unless you see and actualize, you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. I'm sure kind of Joe went into that when you talked together with him on Wednesday as well. So what does that mean? So that you cannot transform consciousness, you cannot transform a system unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. Unless you kind of unless you activate your deeper sensing capacities. So it really is putting our attention on the interior condition from where we operate. And when I did the interviews, and many of them I did together with Joseph Jaworski, kind of who joined you earlier this week, that underlie really the research that underlies the development of Theory U and the U process. One of the interviewees, so the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, he summarized his experience of leading transformational change with the following line. He said, at the end of this conversation I had with him, he said, the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So let me translate. The success of what I do as a change maker depends on the inner place from that I operate. So what is that inner place? Today, I would summarize that with these 3 words. So basically, inner place means stop downloading, right? Stop acting on your habits of thought and habits of interaction. Stop downloading and begin to cultivate and activate these 3 inner instruments of knowing. curiosity, compassion, courage, or open mind, open heart, open will. So that's basically, what Joe and I started like a whole bunch of years ago, and what we have been exploring in a variety of ways. So, and that's kind of the deeper leadership work, the deeper work of change making, right? But let's be real. What has happened actually over the past 4 years? We all know what's happened, right? The exact opposite. The exact opposite. So an enormous amplification of closing the mind, closing the heart, closing the will. You can translate that as a freeze reaction of the human mind, AKA doubt, hate, and fear. So instead of seeing with fresh eyes, it's about blinding and denial, right? 25,000 lies. Instead of empathizing and sensing, right? Beginning to see a situation through the eyes of someone else, it's to desense and entrench, dig yourself in, right? Instead of letting go of the past, and presencing means sensing and actualizing the highest future possibility. We do the opposite. We hold on to the past, and absencing means losing the connection. Instead of bringing the new into reality as it desires, we engage in collective patterns of manipulation, blaming others, violence, and eventually self-destruction, which is what we see going on right now. So that's what we have been experiencing, an enormous amplification. Why is that? Well, social media is one, key mechanism here, right? Activating hate, anger, and fear in order to maximize user engagement, in order to, be a successful trillion-dollar companies. Works for Mark Zuckerberg and is undermining the well-being of people and also our democracy. So what does that? I think living in the 21st century means not only talking about curiosity, compassion, and courage. Living in the 21st century means understanding this thing above here, right? Getting our arms around. Because if we just close our eyes, then we move into denial, right? So how can we keep our gaze onto that phenomenon? What do we see? We see the conditions of post-truth, post-democracy, post-humanity, which is really about spread.
Hey, Otto. I think we've lost Otto. Rick?
Yeah, we've lost him. He had a second line. We'll see if he comes in on that one.
Otto, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. Your screen just froze. He had indicated, everyone in the green room, that he'd been having some challenges with his computer. So
Both of them went down, Jim. Let me see. Okay. He's back. He's coming back on again.
there you go. Are you back, Otto?
We don't hear you yet, Otto, even though your mic's open. Lost him again, Jim.
So sorry, everyone. Technology's happening here. He's trying.
Yeah, he's there. We're just not hearing him.
Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha now. Thank you, Otto.
Here we go. We lost about the last, say, 2 or 3 minutes, Otto.
So
It was getting your hands around fear, hate, and doubt. It's where we lost you.
sorry for the little disruption.
All right.
So can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
You're good.
So basically, the main thought is something very simple, right? So we deal with fear, hate, and doubt. And if we want to understand really, being a change maker in the 21st century means to get our mind around that, to understand that, and to not only avoid that phenomenon, but being able to transform that phenomenon, I think, because that's where the energy is, right? So the 67 million people voting for Trump, kind of. So obviously there's a lot of energy there. We need to understand that, and we are collectively enacting structures kind of that are feeding into that. So in the column that Jim was mentioning, I described this amplification of doubt, hate, and fear in terms of these 3 conditions: post-truth, post-democracy, and post-humanity. By which I mean really the disinformation and doubt, the sowing and spreading of disinformation and doubt, the architectures of separation, and the fueling of fanaticism and fear. So that's the world we live in. So these are the conditions kind of we are experiencing, conditions that in part we collectively enact, in part we operate in our collective structures we operate in. So the real question on the table is, for us, how can we transform that? How can we transform these enabling conditions of Trumpism? And the first kind of the post-truth condition, which is about spreading disinformation and doubt, really is an invitation to not only restore traditional science, but really kind of honing our deeper capacities of listening. The essence of science really is about letting data talk to you. And I think including this week, but including also the COVID situation, we are going through one lesson after another one, where reality is teaching us to listen with humility, or as my mentor at Shine is liking to say, kind of humble leadership, right? Listening with humility without us projecting our own judgments into reality, but really letting reality talk to us. Building architectures of connection, right? So the post-democracy condition is really calling for, and that's maybe the most important area of civic innovation going forward. We learned this summer that I'm speaking summer of the Northern Hemisphere now, that the streets are an important civic infrastructure here in America. That's the Black Lives Matter experience. And the question really is, what are the new enabling civic infrastructures that allow us to move the conversation and to move our listening beyond our own bubbles, beyond our own echo chambers. And I think the answer to that question has a lot to do with local innovation. We need new local infrastructures of deep listening, of deep dialogue, of civic engagement that can be replicated and can be in support and can be accessed kind of in every village, in every city, kind of in every ecosystem or community. And the third level here is in terms of the post-humanity, is a capacity that has to do with action confidence. And what I mean with action confidence is not like performance confidence, doing this well or having the confidence to do this or that, very well. But it's more the capacity. Action confidence really means the capacity to step into the unknown, the capacity to step into uncharted territories, the capacity to sense emerging future possibilities, and then to operate, to act from that heightened sense of connections. So the capacity to sense and actualize the future as it emerges is another way of saying that. So that's, I think, on a personal and on a micro and meso level, I think the challenge for us and the three capacities kind of that we need to develop to really address Trumpism more on a deeper root level of root issue. And the other, image or, thought I wanted to share as we move into the conversation now is that just responding on a micro level, on an individual or face-to-face level, obviously is not enough. We need innovation infrastructures that address this situation of post-truth, post-democracy, and post-humanity at the level of the whole system, which really translates into innovations in infrastructures on a societal level in terms of learning, in terms of democracy, and in terms of our economy. So new learning infrastructures that really make whole person, whole learning, whole person, whole system learning environments accessible to everyone. So not just kind of for the few select. New democratic infrastructures that make democratic governance more direct, more distributed, and more dialogic, right? With dialogue, I mean making a system see itself. It's like the bending the beam of attention back onto ourselves, onto our own assumptions, onto our own process of thinking and sense making. And new economic infrastructures, which has to do with infrastructures that support us in the transformation of the economy from ego-system awareness to ecosystem awareness, by which I mean an awareness that is focusing on the well-being of all. So I'm sure kind of you're well familiar with these three things, but what I'm saying here is, hey, it's not enough to just talk about that. We need innovations and infrastructures on all three levels, and that's the work of this decade. Because let's just face it, kind of this decade is the decade of transformation. Transformation is going to happen anyway. It can happen through collapse of the old system, or it can happen in a more proactive way. And what's missing in the world, so transformation is happening one way or another. What's missing in our world today is transformation literacy, which is the capacity to respond to this disruption in a way that is connecting with our highest future possibilities, in a way that is activating our capacity to step into the unknown. And so that's really my closing thought. And that's maybe Jim and others kind of where I would love to continue the conversation what are we called to do now? I think we are called to build really these deeper learning and innovation infrastructures. So if this is the work that we try to, that brings us together here, planetary healing, civilizational renewal, then what I believe is the only way to really make that happen is to activate generative social fields, kind of to transform social fields, which is the qualities of connections and the collaborative, qualities or the interactive qualities that we have, from antagonistic to co-creative, right? That's kind of generative social fields means kind of how can we activate creativity, not only individually, but also on the level of the collective. And to do that, that's really what, what we do. That's the transformational leadership work today in all communities, in all ecosystem, in all stakeholder situations, in institutional work. And to make that happen, right, we need a support structure. And I call this support structure School for Transformation. And what I mean by that is to democratize the access to transformation literacy, right? The access to the methods and tools to actually make that happen. And that has something to do with, integrating science, awareness-based social technologies, and also self-development, which is consciousness, the transformation of or evolution of consciousness, and of course, societal transformation. So there is, I think we need to build this infrastructure, this new civic infrastructure, one way or another. And one of the places that would actually lend themselves to be, a primary venue for that would be our institutions of learning, right? Particularly institutions of higher ed. Now, that's more like a possibility, and it, happens in small ways here and there, but that's a little bit where I have my attention on, how to build these learning infrastructures, not in a way that is, separating yourself from the world, but is really kind of in support of the profound societal and civilizational transformation processes that we know need to happen in this decade, but that will not happen if we do not create the supporting infrastructure that any of such processes would and will require. So with that, back to you, Jim, and back to our conversation.
Oh boy, I love this, Otto. Thank you so much. And I'd like to just jump in to the transformation part, because I think all of us are aware of the challenges. And I think one of the points that Shelly made and Otto made, which is something we're all needing to reflect very deeply on, is that not only did Trump get 5 million more votes than he got in 2016, but there appears, at least in the first couple of days of analysis, to indicate that Biden didn't make any inroads into Trump territory. Trump didn't make any inroads into Biden territory. And in some ways, the US electorate is descending into tribalism. And I think that's worth thinking about. But I think that the real issue as we come to a close on our week is, how do we engage in the transformational process? And I think, Otto, that's where the U theory, U process, presencing that you and Joe and others have pioneered all these years is really now coming into its own. It's an idea whose time has come. This school of transformation would love to have ubiquity, which is similarly focused and engaged in how do you prepare people for the transformation to come, to ensure that they're prepared for it. They have the mindset and the skill sets to navigate it. and to do so in a way that allows them to thrive abundantly and build resilient community. And so anything that we can do to support your work, I would love to be in touch with you. And I wanted to start your comment here with something that Marty, I'm just looking for it here, a comment that Marty Clemens made that I think is worth reflecting on. You know, that historically we've always used shame as a tool for transformation, but it's a terrible tool for transformation. And I just wonder what, if you had to name a tool for transformation, knowing, you know, with our Abrahamic tradition, we've used guilt and shame very effectively to induce behavior and transform souls. I wonder what your comment would be. And then a comment that Claire Rosenfield made about what can we learn from the indigenous people? I mean, in terms of the indigenous wisdom, Otto, what have you learned from it, and how would you view the experience and perspective of the indigenous peoples in the transformation process?
Yeah, so I mean, on the first one, I mean, first on your comment on the current situation is actually is absolutely true what you say. Kind of, we are in a frozen situation where nothing much has moved, right? So, and that may be okay under certain conditions, but if you live in a moment where the economy has been collapsing, where the country is really hitting the wall, where we have almost like 250,000 deaths, and where we have more than 8 million people slipping into poverty. And then, so kind of basically, we deal with situations. We have the firestorms, on one side of the countries and the hurricanes on the other one. So we live in a situation of collapse already, right? And then no one, so usually in all political conditions, the sitting president now has a problem, right? So that's, and if at least by the base, and the base has been extended, it's probably not extended, but more of the base have been activated. It's probably more correct. If that has zero influence on your own voting behavior, that means the system is frozen. There's no, so from a learning perspective, when you look at this, what's the learning perspective on democracy? Well, you need to close the feedback loop. You have like, behavior there, and then results, and that's reflected in elections. That's how the system has worked so far. That feedback loop is now broken, right? So that's what we see. And it's calling for an unfreeze, right? There is something frozen that's no longer looping back. And on the unfreezes, so the unfreezing, what are the resources for unfreezing? I would say shame and guilt, probably, particularly in this particular case, right? Not good candidates, right? They're actually part of the problem there, right? Mm-hmm. So, and same thing with fear, probably. You could also mention fear, right? Because it was fear, let's say from an environmental movement perspective, that's what we have been using, right? Scaring people into, different behavior. Well, that worked for a few, but, basically, if you look at the success factor of that strategy, it has been also quite limited. I think we are in a situation where we need to rethink these approaches. And yes, for change, there's like, as the saying goes, right? There is desperation and aspiration, right? And I think the desperation part, we don't need to organize, right? Because that's already coming our way. We can't even, so the situations of collapse are already underway. I mean, just look at the environmental situation. It's going to happen, so it's too late to regain control over that. What we have control is how we respond. And that has to do with this interior condition. And that will make all the difference. What I learned in situations of disruption in the past is that in the same organization, the same disruption can lead to, in one part of the organization, to isolation and depression and loss of agency. And in another part of the same organization, to a strengthening of the connection and to an activation of individual and collective agency. And the difference is leadership. The difference is our capacity, let me use a different word than leadership because that may not work for everyone. Our capacity to hold the space, to show up, right, in a way where we address our not knowing, where we lean into our not knowing, where we lean into our discomfort, and where we also lean maybe into some of the elements of fear that also need to be embraced, to be transformed. So a lot has to do, I would say, with holding space. And I think if I learned anything over the past few years, it is that the way transformation works is really, it's not linear. It's not a gradual process, right? When you look back, you see patterns and you know there's never any progress going to happen. But when you look forward, then disruption happens. And suddenly, we as human beings, we are beings that first screw up everything. But then when we wake up, we can shift patterns instantly. We saw that this year, right? The 2020 experience is that we can transform the patterns of collective behavior. When we put our attention and intention on one single thing, we can bend the curve. We can flatten the curve. And I think we saw that on one occasion, also not in all countries, obviously, but in many. And that gives us an indication that in reality, the structures that often feel rigid around us are much more fluid, right? Are much more fluid when we come into moments of disruptions. And we'll see a lot of more of these things in the decade to come. So we need to strengthen our capacity to use these situations in a way that are aligned with our intention and that are realizing these possibilities of profound change that are also in the air right now and that many people feel but don't quite know how to put into practice right here and right now.
Well, I think you're making an incredibly profound point, that disruption's happening. The environment is just collapsing. There's nothing much we can do about that anymore. There are things we can do. So the question is, how do we enter that river of a change of eras and the transformation that's happening at every level in a way that is positive? And that's where we need exactly what you're talking about, sort of transformation literacy. I think people think that we're still in a flat world. We're still in a stable world, and it's getting a little bumpy. But if we could just get through this pandemic, we can get back to normal. But I think what you're saying rightly is there's no more normal. We're in a cascade of accelerating transformational processes at every level. And what we need is transformational literacy. And I think that's really the challenge of the progressive movement. It seems to me, Otto, is how do we enable people now to engage in the inevitability of transformation in a positive way. And it's within that context, I'd like to just raise a question that Marilyn Hamilton is putting in the chat, about what's our definition actually of transformation? Is there one kind of transformation, or are there a spectrum of transformations? And if that's the case, then that means that what we have to do is meet people exactly where they are, because every individual and community and demographic, as it were, has a different kind of transformation to go through. So we sort of have to be like Krishna and the gopis, right? We have to be dancing with all of them simultaneously, individually, in order to make this thing work. So speak to us about how you understand the multidimensionality of the transformational process.
Well, I mean, one way to think about transformation is very simply about a process of letting go and letting come. Letting go of what? Letting go of everything that isn't essential. And letting come of what? So letting come of what now, kind of in such a moment of letting go, is beginning to develop resonance with me. So I think the word resonance is an interesting word, because resonance is neither purely subjective, nor is it just something merely objective. So it's kind of, it's a quality of relationship that I feel, not just with something exterior, but with a field of possibility. And that's really, I would say, the heart of transformation. And so when I did the interviews with Joe, when was that? It was like 20 years or so ago, 21 years. One of the things, so basically listening, right? Listening to people who had created real profound innovation in their own area of culture or science or business or society. And what really struck us was this, when you double click on their journey, kind of that there is like a deeper process at work that they describe in very similar ways, and which has to do with an intimate relationship to that sense of future possibility that we can have as human beings. So it's not just anyone's possibility, it's a possibility that actually depends on, stays in need of me to bring it into reality. It's something very personal, right? And I think that's the essence of social entrepreneurship. It's the essence of also transformation. So how can we, because I mean, there's all this language around transformation, all the blah, 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 all the hot air around us. And what does most of that translate into? Optimizing the past, right? Most of institutional change translates into optimizing what we already have, optimizing the status quo. So the big threshold really is increasing our own literacy in A, letting go, right, some of those existing patterns and structures, and B, leaning into that resonance, right? A resonance to an emerging future possibility that stays in need of me to bring it into reality as it desires. So the language I just use is a verbatim translation of Martin Buber, right? I and thou, kind of. So that's, he of course described that process already. It's a deeper, it's kind of part of who we are as human beings. It's something we can lean into. And I think, yes, people like Martin Buber, they described that before. But now, what's different now is we as a civilization, right? We are hitting a wall that requires us to operate that way, not only individually, but also on a level of the community, on the level of the whole ecosystem, on a collective level.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I mean, I think that, just to restate that, everyone, because I think what Otto just gave us about transformation not only answers Marilyn's question, but broadens it. That if you think of transformation, if I understand you correctly, Otto, about letting go and letting come, that implies a certain resonance with possibility. And that possibility is going to interact with each individual in a different way. And that comes back to the original point that you made at the beginning of your remarks. I wrote it down. In the end, it's about activating our own agency. So if you think about the Trumpists and the kind of the alt-right, what are they motivated by? Holding on to the past with increasing radical ferociousness and not engaging in the process of transformation. And the more transformation is subsuming our world, the harder and more violently they're holding on to a past that essentially no longer exists. And so that breakdown, breakthrough phenomenon that you're talking about is upon us in a way that Martin Buber, sitting in Jerusalem, 75 years ago, could speculate about. But now the entire human race is caught up in this process. And therefore, the literacy that we need to bring about this phenomenon couldn't be more important. Now, did I get that accurately stated? How would you refine that? Because this is a seminal point, everybody.
So absolutely, I think you summarized it much more succinctly than I was stumbling into it. But so I want to just add one more piece of footnote to that. So, which is that you're right. So when you think about the alt-right, when you think about making America great again, right? What's the most important word? The last one, again, right? It's turning away. It's kind of turning to a past, a time that no longer is. So whenever disruption happens, we as human beings, individually, in groups, and also on the level of larger collectives, we are always confronted or facing a choice, right? We can either turn away in order to make ... great again, right? Or we can turn toward, right? Turn toward is leaning into that space of not knowing, of discomfort, and of vulnerability. And that is only possible if we cultivate the open mind, the open heart, the open will. So that's just the, but we know it's hard. None of us can do that, right? So it's something we need to build our capacity for. None of us can do that like 100%. So when you now deal with phenomena of Trumpism and absencing, I think, and when you now look at how does this play out, say, in the world of institutions, I think a very useful term is the term of cracks. Because before a system collapse, what do you see? You see cracks happening. Mm-hmm. And a crack is where the old system, the old way of operating, is creating results that are non-acceptable for that system, that may be undermining the sustainability of that institution. So there's it's kind of core for so it's kind of addressing the core of that, the core viability of that institution. So if you talk to people, if you talk to systems, always understand, I mean, the foundation of opening the mind, opening the heart. How can you help others to do that? Apply listening, right? It's holding spaces of deep listening. And listening for what? Listening for the crack, right? Where is the opening? Where is the pain and pressure point? And where is the energy in the system that is already kind of creating some readiness for stepping out of the old trail and moving kind of into a new uncharted territory? So I think the interesting thing is that today everyone is feeling that. Everyone is feeling the cracks personally in our institutions, in our organizations. And that's the wonderful opportunity we have. We need to be a lot more skillful in helping ourselves and helping others to discover these cracks and use them as gateway into the emerging future.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Otto, thank you so much. This has been rich beyond measure, and I think has brought our week together to a very gracious and challenging close. Just want to reach out to you, Shelly. Is there any final comment you would like to make on what Otto has said or the week before we adjourn?
Another wonderful session with a speaker that gives me so much hope. And the only thing I would add is just to reinforce underlying theme there. Use your imagination. Use your imagination. Think about potential scenarios. Think about if this, then that. Think about how you can respond differently. Use your imagination in your life. Use your imagination as you look at the world. Our mental models are so baked into what we see as reality. It's very hard to purposefully break those down. And I think imagination is your best tool that you have to do that, to reimagine a new future and give yourself the permission to walk towards it. So thank you so much, Otto. It's absolutely fabulous. I appreciate your work so much. And yes, let's continue to move forward into a future that we can all benefit from and be proud of.
Otto, any final words you'd like to make to the group?
Maybe the final word from me is what I learned over the years as the key leverage point really of awareness-based systems change, which is realigning attention and intention. The ultimate scarce resource in this century is attention, right? So everyone is competing on everyone else's attention. So as change makers, that's kind of the foundation and starting point. And too often is our attention. Energy follows attention. That's the universal principle. That means whatever you as a change maker, as a leader, pay attention to, or as a parent, right? Whatever you pay attention to, that's where the energy goes. For example, you want to avoid the bad scenario, that's where the energy goes, right? You are amplifying the bad scenario. Realigning attention and intention is the core principle of awareness-based leadership. And that means cultivating, creating spaces in your day, in your week, in your work, where you really give your highest quality attention. Not just on all the stuff you want to prevent, but the future that you want to bring into the world.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This has been a marvelous week, marvelous session. And I think we'll close at this point. Those of you who are interested in continuing the discussion in a more informal way, you can go into our after session chat. There's a link in the chat box. And then we'll convene again on Monday. We'll be keeping everybody updated, and we're going to continue this theme of transformation. I think it's a fair statement to say that if there's any new norm in the world, it is not stability. It's transformation. And how we understand that and how we use it to activate our agency, our being, our will, our imagination to build a better world is the singular challenge, I think, of all people of goodwill. And Otto, I am so deeply respectful for everything that you have done over the decades now in service to this noble mission, and look forward to working with you more closely as history unfolds. So thank you, Otto. Thank you, Shelly. Wonderful commentary this week. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you again on Monday, 5:00 p.m. Central European Time for Humanity Rising. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'll be in touch.